Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Thursday, July the 30th. And welcome to our commentary. Well, the talk of, I guess, everywhere is Dr. Fauci. And I've got a few thoughts about that later. But I want to begin with a post that I have over at the American Thinker this morning. And it's about what happened in Cuba, where they had the July 26th celebration. This is something they do every year. They've been doing it since the so-called revolution won the or came to power back in '59. And for those of you who may not know, this was the day that Castro's group attacked a military barrack in Santiago de Cuba, which is all the way to the east. It's actually close to Guantanamo Bay in that area. And the attack was a failure, but Castro was arrested, convicted, and then was released by Batista later in a act of amnesty, I guess he called it. And we know what happened after that. He went to Mexico and showed up in Cuba, and well, history changed. But this event yesterday was typical of these events. There's always a big demonstration of support for the regime. Always a lot of people who show up to cheer, usually people who kind of are sometimes have to go there and cheer. But there was one missing piece. I think for the first time since these rallies started or these celebrations began, there wasn't a Castro at the top there watching the parade or whatever. Raul Castro, of course, the surviving younger brother, he was not there. And there's all kinds of speculation as to what that means. And I don't really know because this is not the kind of government that opens up a great deal about its interior happenings. But I think it was probably a health issue. If I had to guess what it was, I think Raul Castro, is clearly probably not doing very well as far as his health. And they just didn't want to put him out there for 2 or 3 hours. I mean, that could be a little bit too much for him. So, he stayed home. He didn't participate. I don't know if if they showed a video or something of him. I don't know. From what I understand, he hasn't been seen in public for over a month. Again, I think it's a health issue. I don't think it's anything more than that. I think that they probably, they don't have much of a way of protecting him from the environment because of his health. And I think it's probably a health issue, and they didn't want to put him out there looking really bad. So I think that's what happened. It was a health issue. But as far as this, the day events, from what I could read, it was usual stuff. It was an anti-American speech. The United States is responsible for all of Cuba's problems, anti-embargo, and we're here. We're going to fight to the last man to protect our revolution. So in that respect, it wasn't any different than the speeches we've heard before. But again, historically, though, the big absence was the fact that Raul Castro was not there. And to the best of my knowledge, that's the first time that a Castro has not been present at one of these historical events. So I don't know what it means. I don't know if he's really sick. He's obviously not doing well. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have been there participating in the event. So, what does that mean for Cuba? Your guess is as good as mine, but he wasn't there. And his absence, I'm sure, has created a lot of conversation within Cuba and outside of Cuba. Now, the big story, as I mentioned at the beginning, the big story is Dr. Fauci and his appearance before the Senate. I don't know if he's coming back to the Congress, to the House. I don't know if that's part of the itinerary. I don't know. But we're already hearing that some states are going to subpoena him. Alabama, I believe, Florida is the other one, because even though he has a pardon, there may be some state problems that Dr. Fauci has, because after all, these issues that he was involved with impacted the states on an individual basis, some more than others. So we'll see what happens with that. Again, I don't think they can touch the pardon unless they can demonstrate that President Biden was not aware of the pardon, that somebody in his staff put through the pardon through the signature machine or auto pen or whatever they call it. If they can prove that, they might be able to take the pardon away, but that could take years. And that's going to have to go to the Supreme Court. And again, I don't know. I don't believe I don't believe a pardon has ever been tested in our nation's history, because that's one of those absolute powers that the president has that simply are his powers, and nobody really wants to change it, because obviously both sides want to have that power when they govern. But he may have problems in states. And I heard that I heard the Attorney General of Alabama saying, come down, Mr. Fauci, we need to talk, and we need to talk very seriously. So he may still have problems at state levels, because that pardon is only for federal issues, not for state issues. Now, look, I'll be honest with you. I think at this point, Fauci has lost the PR battle. I'm not sure that there's anything more that he can do, or anybody. I think the American public knows that he was pardoned. So at the same time, but they also know that something wrong happened. So he may have that pardon and have that pardon protect him, but his reputation is shot. And I think most Americans understand that something didn't add up in the way this was conducted. I have a post coming out tomorrow about this, where I simply asked the question, how is it possible that governors in red states looked at the information and opened up their schools and opened up their economies, and the governors in Democrat states looked at the same science, as they like to call it, but they kept the schools closed and their businesses closed? That doesn't make any sense if we're talking about science. I mean, science is science, as they always tell us. You got to believe the science. You can't be anti-science. Well, if the governor of some states, Republican states, look at the science and conclude that you can put the kids back in school, and the governors of Democrat states look at the science and say, no, the kids cannot be back in school, obviously there's a problem with the science, or at least the interpretation of the science. So we'll have to see. But I think, as I say, he may have won the legal battle in the sense that he's never going to go to jail or something like that. But I think his reputation is shot. And I don't really see much of a future for him in science. And he has actually done a great harm to science, and especially to our health industry. Because, from now on, I think people are going to question whether whatever comes out of the office of virus or whatever, disease or whatever it's called, whether it's politicized science or not. And as I mentioned in the post that is coming out tomorrow, this is the first time that we've ever had a virus that became a political weapon in a presidential campaign. And that's what happened here. COVID was used to impact the 2020 election, whether it was shutting down schools, shutting down businesses, and hurting the American economy, which also hurt Trump, or whether it was for whatever reason. But no question that COVID was politicized. And that's something that should not happen. You can disagree politically about certain things, but science should be science. And the people who are telling us that this is safe or unsafe, we should be able to believe them without thinking they're doing this because they want to hurt Trump, or they're doing this because they want to help somebody else. And I think that's where, unfortunately, Fauci got in trouble, that he became too closely associated with the effort to destroy Trump's campaign by using the virus as a weapon against Trump. And I think that was a disaster. I really do. I think it was a disaster for the country. It didn't hurt Trump. He came back 4 years later, and he won. Obviously didn't help Fauci, because look at the position he's in right now. But it did hurt a lot of children who were not allowed to go to school and were set back by the fact that there was no regular school. And that is provable. That's not my opinion. I mean, that is clearly provable that some kids were hurt by not having school the normal way. So again, Fauci is done. His reputation is done. But I think, for the sake of the country, we have to have a rehabilitation of whoever makes these calls, because You don't want to sit there and question whether it's political or not. It shouldn't be political. It's science. But we're going to have to figure this out. But there has to be an effort by both sides not to politicize these things again. Otherwise, I think the American people suffer. And in the case of COVID, a lot of kids suffer. A lot of kids suffer. Well, let me leave you today with a little happy birthday. Happy number 85 to Paul Anka. Now, here's a great trivia question. Who wrote that song, My Way, that was made famous by Frank Sinatra? It was actually Paul Anka. A lot of people don't know that. In fact, I didn't know that until a few years ago. That I always assumed that somebody else had written that song for Frank Sinatra. No, it was actually written by Paul Anka, who I'm sure made a lot of money out of the residuals of that song that Paul Anka wrote, and Frank Sinatra. I think it became almost like the signature song for Frank Sinatra, if I remember correctly. Well, thank you for your time. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you later. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.